Hello and welcome to Focus 54. My name is Jeffrey Murimbechi, and this is your weekly guide to real African news, where we'll give you a real feel of what is happening within the continent. Now, today we are focusing on a big statistic that we sit on every single day, in that the majority, the demography of this African continent is predominantly, and more than half of this continent are young people, the youth, the future of this continent and this country, Zimbabwe. And we're going to find out where we're going. So we're going to be talking to one of the young stalwarts of this movement of youth empowerment, as well as active African consciousness, in the next episode. But we first start by touching down on African news that is topping the web and topping news headlines across the continent. And we start in Zimbabwe. And as you know, Africa is the biggest tobacco producer in Zimbabwe, and the auction floors opened this week with the vice president making his way to the auction floors, where on opening day, the most expensive, or I'll say the highest price that was fetched per kg of tobacco was $4.92. In the wake of the El Nino drought and all of this, there have been many challenges, and farmers, government institutions and private players are working together to move from exporting 90% of the total tobacco that in its raw form, and to give more value addition so that farmers and everyone within the value chain earns more. Now, a lot of this is available in our news bulletins, so do follow us. You will find out more on that. Now we move to South Africa, where Johannesburg's dry taps partly blamed on the heat wave. Now, residents across areas in South Africa's largest cities have suffered during the current heat wave, and some have now been without water for over a week. Now, public water service providers in Johannesburg say that water reservoir levels have decreased, and water consumption has also been increased as a result of this heat wave. Now we turn to Mozambique, where we've got some sad news, where 4 people died and 1 person is injured in the storm of Filippo that hit southern Mozambique's Inhambane province. And according to a state-owned broadcaster, and this has ripped off schools and residential homes, and those images are really totally disturbing. And this is not a movie. This is the horror of nature taking its toll on Africa. And this is in other parts of Mozambique, in areas, tourist areas such as Bara and Tofo, the waves have destroyed several boats, and some tourists have had to flee. And local authorities say the storm has disrupted electricity supply, communication lines, and the general welfare of people. And closer to the center of Africa, in fact, in Central Africa and the DRC, women stand up breaking barriers in Africa. Now, Germaine Ololo is a renowned Congolese comedian. Now, whenever on stage, she raises awareness one joke at a time, and be it a scene about forced marriage, violence against women, and complicated situations of widows in society, she tackles all those in the way that she performs on stage and her skits. And the comedian, who is a mentor of young counterparts, welcomes them every week at the headquarters of the Faith, which is the International Festival of Women's Speech. So do find her online, find her skits, and find out more about this woman who is breaking barriers in the DRC. That is a quick look at news topping headlines across the continent. Stay tuned for the second segment. Our special guest is in studio. And welcome back to the second edition of Focus 54. As promised, I have a special guest in studio. He's the co-founder of the Zimbabwe Institute of African Integration, an organization that has dotted the African map, the Zimbabwean flag, across the world and the continent. And I'm joined by none other than Justice Mufiri, who's here to help us out in terms of African youth empowerment, youth integration within Africa and around the world. Good to have you, Justice, with so much work that you have. Thank you for making time to make it to studio.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Now, let's get straight into the matter because, nowadays the attention span of people is really, really short, especially young people. Yeah. Now, the big question is, how can young people effectively mobilize and empower themselves to contribute to development in Africa? We have countries such as Zimbabwe with Vision 2030, some with Vision 2050 and all of that. And it's the young people of today that are responsible for that. How do we do it?
Well, I'm glad you make mention of Vision 2030 in your question, because Vision 2030 is the primary document and the primary policy upon which we are riding the work that we are doing currently. So if you go to the demographics, the youth are the hugest demographic in the country. They are the hugest demographic on the continent, the African continent, that is. That tells you that the future of the world is upon African youth, because the world is old, but Africa is young.
Africa is young. So let's say if we're talking about in terms of total percentage of the demography, can we say at least 40% or more?
60%.
60%?
60% are between the ages of 15 and 35.
Okay.
So that tells you that the youth demographic is supposed to be exploited to the benefit of the African continent, Zimbabwe in particular. If you go to the National Development Strategy 1, a critical document feeding into the Vision 2030, which you just mentioned, you go to chapter 14 of that document. It says youth, sport, arts, and recreation. That tells you the broad range of things that are related to the youth and issues that matter in terms of identity creation and making sure that the youth can participate and contribute meaningfully to the development trajectory of the country. So it's us looking at youths in the country, how they can effectively be governized to come into perspective when youth and development issues are concerned. Going to mining, going to agriculture, going to every sector like tourism, the youth must be present in those institutions, in those fields, in those sectors.
Justice, how old are you? I know you didn't expect that question.
Well, yeah, I am older than age, and age is just a number.
Okay. The reason why I wanted to ask your actual age is you mentioned that the youth are between 15 and 35, and a country such as Zimbabwe has had 23 years under illegally imposed sanctions. Yeah. And that means there's a 23-year-old who was born in this environment. There are several who have, coming of age, and this is the only environment that they've known. Economically, not just talking about Zimbabwe, but African countries. From your interactions, from your secretary generals and members of your organization going around the world, what is the effect of sanctions on a country and on a people, especially the youth?
Yeah, I think the brand of sanctions is mostly felt by the youth. It's very unfortunate because when you target a nation with sanctions or illegal economic embargoes, what you have simply done is to be a thief of the future of the youth. Because when we cannot access opportunities on the global scale because there are sanctions, embargoes that have been put upon our country, what that translates to is that there's no future of growth, there's no future of industrialization, there's no innovation, because we feed from interactions that we get outside of our own selves. If you want to innovate, you have to go outside the box. Mm-hmm. So outside the box is where there are embargoes. So those who put sanctions upon our country and even on the African continent, there are a few other countries that have had these illegal economic embargoes.
So in that aspect, you were telling me that your organization has been to the youth conference in Russia and many other places. You obviously have some sort of network with other African youth organizations. What do people outside Africa think of young people in Africa? What is the image they think of? Because when you talk about movies, some of them think Wakanda is a country in
yes,
Africa.
They do. Actually, when you say I'm from Zimbabwe, they can even ask you, do you know this brother called so-and-so from Kenya? They think Kenya could be some city in the war
Or maybe you
region
just take
of
a bus
Africa.
from here to Egypt in 20 minutes.
You know, they think it's just one country, it's just one village. They could even ask you, so do you wake up to the sound of roaring lions? I mean, there is an image that has been put across the world by the global media. It's an agenda setting thing that has been done.
So is that not one of the reasons why, with the huge, vast number of young people we have, why that has not, you know, with 60%, above 60% of the entire African population being young people, that means there's an expanse of, I would say, cheap labor. Why is that not being turned into jobs by young people and those that are outside Africa?
Well, it's pretty easy for us to think that because the demographic is huge, then it immediately translates to the opportunity of them being the builders of the economy and the like. Mm-hmm. There is intergenerational dialogue that needs to happen, because as the youth, we come from them, that the forebearers that came before us. Their skills, experiences, and lifetime achievements that those people have made, which you're supposed to tap into, because when you are a youth, you need to learn from in the proper sense of the socialization of the African society. You don't just emerge from nowhere.
You emerge from somewhere.
You emerge from somewhere, and that route where you come from is supposed to be your main reason for you to learn, because when you learn from the experiences of the elder. No matter how tall the youth becomes, they can never see further than the elder who is sitting.
That sounds like an African proverb.
It is an African proverb. And we speak African wisdom because we are socialized in a community that says, I am because we are.
Okay. That's the foundation of Ubuntu.
The foundation of Ubuntu.
All right, now let's, before we take a short break, let's talk about the scope of the work that your organization does. Because when we talk of integration, sometimes people think it's a big Zoom call where you have faces from all over Africa and you talk, and it just ends in speaking. What is the day-to-day mandate and the work that you're doing with your organization and organizations around the world?
Yeah, ours is a mission to bring together the youth of Zimbabwe under the leadership of the country that is the Second Republic. Mm-hmm. So there is a vision, the Vision 2030. Mm-hmm. There is NDS 1 that ends in 2025. Mm-hmm. There's NDS 2 coming after that. Mm-hmm. All is feeding into an agenda for an upper middle income society for the country by the year 2030.
So you're getting that ready?
Yes, of course. We are the primary demographic in the development and achievement of that particular target. So with Vision 2030, if you are able to galvanize and rally youths behind that vision, they can contribute from their communities under devolution agenda, which is being held by government, to say in your particular localities, what are the opportunities that are available to you from your community? How do you participate in those opportunities to bring forth the achievement of Vision 2030? When we have done that, we have secured, charity begins at home. So when you have Zimbabwe leading in the GDP, I was mentioning that Rwanda and Zambia's GDPs combined are still less than Zimbabwe's GDP.
But people still don't know that out there.
But people don't know that.
So you know what I'm going to do, Justice. I see clearly if I could multiply you into 10,000 more people, those numbers we're talking about, 2025, 2030, will be quickly accelerated. But one of the reasons from all of the shows that we've had on ZBC TV, if you look at us online and all of that, we have one problem that the Second Republic and the government has been fighting for a very long time. That is the issue of intoxication, drug and substance abuse, which is not starting at the macro level. It's starting at home, it's starting in streets. And we've got a young person in studio who's going to help us address that, how that menace is stopping Zimbabwe and the rest of Africa from going forward. We take a short break, we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Focus 54, the third and final segment. And in studio, we have Justice Mufiri, who has been telling us about all the sterling work, the plans that young people, not only in Zimbabwe, but the rest of Africa, are falling into a vision of an upper middle income society by the year 2030. Part of Vision 2030 from our Second Republic, and it's cascading not only to young people within the country, but young people across Africa and some parts of Europe. Now, Justice, let's talk about the big elephant in the room, the thing that is arguably known in the streets of Zimbabwe as Tsomtso, Nyekudakwa, the issue of drug and substance abuse among young people. A school of thought from a conference I went to in Pretoria a couple of years ago said that if you want to attack a nation, if you want to attack a movement, make sure that the young people within that place are intoxicated. How have you found this problem within Zimbabwean society, and is it unique to us alone? And what are other African countries saying?
Yeah, it's it's not a Zimbabwean problem alone. That's important. But I usually quip and say, do you know that ongopauri kuita zveguka nedombo kune mayouths ari kutoita zvedombo in doing sculpture? That's stone sculpture.
Stone sculpture.
And then we ask the question of how much do you make out of one piece that you can make in sculpture? Somebody has been creative, they make their work, they do something with stone, and they get paid for that. Utilization of your talent. So this is the kind of mentality that we are looking forward to having amongst the youth. It takes education, it takes us coming through and saying.
But once again, you've spoken about young people that are like you and I, away from that menace. But from your interactions with youths in Uganda, Rwanda, and many other places, do they have some sort of, I know obviously they always tell you about the best, do they have some sort of scourge of drug and substance abuse, and how are they fighting it there?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate because when you talk to people, they are ambassadors of their country in those spaces. So they quite don't want to emphasize on those aspects. But it's a menace indeed. The drug and substance abuse menace is indeed continental. But the point I was driving at is, and it's important for youths to realize that it's only an idle mind that finds reason to be engaged in things that destroy your own health. Imagine that somebody is just doing stuff to kill their own health. I think that's a pity. You need a youth who are focused, a youth who understand that the development trajectory of the country is upon their own shoulders. Their contribution, no matter how small, their contribution in working in their own communities is what will take Zimbabwe to the next level. And if you contribute, and if you do, you know, the president is always saying brick by brick, it means that it's the small efforts that matter. Your brick will lead to a great Zimbabwe. So you need to participate in national development, tap into the opportunities that are always given out by government, because there are opportunities indeed, and they will always be targeted at youths.
Now, you actually got to a point where I wanted to ask how young people can take part in government initiatives and government decisions. This year is a huge election year for Africa. At least 15 countries are going to the polls this year. Let's start from there. We had our election, and successfully it's being used as a template by other African nations on how to conduct the elections, such as Botswana, taking a couple of notes from the ZEC in Zimbabwe. Are young people a part of these interactive forums, these democratic processes where they're invited, just like every citizen, to go and vote? Are we doing that as Zimbabweans, and are also other African young people having the same consciousness?
Yeah, when you mentioned elections and that Botswana actually came to take notes from us, we are actually even invited to Russia to come and observe the Russian elections.
Wow.
And that tells you how much of...
Even as a youth organization?
That's the Zimbabwean government has been invited to come and observe Russian elections, and that tells you that the impact of Zimbabwe's, you know, I think it draws from our experience as a nation that got independence from a liberation war, and having fought a war that then birthed this independence
and democracy.
We cherish the democracy. We practice democracy with a passion for it, because we fought for it. And the president is always saying that there is nobody then in a position to come and lecture us about democracy and all those aspects surrounding the expression of our liberties, because we fought for it and attained it.
You sound like, I would say, one of the finest specimen of Zimbabwean education. I think the education that we grew up on is different from what's around today. Speaking of education, skills, and the new curriculum, Education 5.0, how does that help young people and the trajectory of where we're trying to take the nation through the generation that's active right now?
Yes, where we are trying to take the nation. Where we are trying to take the nation is an industrialized society, an upper middle income society where everybody has money in their pockets, enough to sustain their lives. So what does it take for us to reach there? It takes innovation and industrialization. And you mentioned rightly that there is the Education 5.0 program, which is currently underway, and where universities have been equipped with innovation hubs, where everybody, every youth in the society, not just from the particular university where the innovation hub is hosted. The innovation hub is just hosted at, say, the University of Zimbabwe.
So let's
but
say
youth from around can come in, they can do their innovative works there. So that tells you that the next point, the next port of call is for the youths to come up with innovations that are relevant to the needs of the country.
So what you're saying to me is that, let's say there's a Great Zimbabwe University and I'm in Masvingo and I have an invention that I would like scaled up. I can knock on that innovation hub and say, here is my...
Very much. The ideas that have been funded through the innovation hubs, many of them have come from students in the institutions, but as well people from the local communities where those innovation hubs are.
So in your vision and in the work that you're doing as an organization, are you telling young people right now that by the year 2030, do you want them to find jobs or do you want them to create jobs?
By the year 2030, we have to be creating jobs. You don't want to create people who go outside there and look for employment when they've been equipped with the skills that should give them a livelihood from school. So, which is why I think the government is stressing on vocational training. Because if you look at the new cabinet, we now have a new ministry that's for youth empowerment, development, and vocational training. So what that says is vocational training is an integral part of the education system, where you equip people with skills that they can make a living out of. People have skills and some are born with them, but when you train people to be carpenters, to be to do metalwork, to be sewers,
they go from assignments to
from
projects.
Those things to projects that will impact their societies, because these are the things that society is demanding. And when you fill a gap of demand by supplying a product, then you'll be rewarded.
I wish I could have a longer conversation with you, Justice, but we have to allow you to do all the work that you're doing on the ground. And thank you so much for joining us on Focus 54. In a nutshell, what the fine gentleman is telling us is that Zimbabwe can be and is already a front runner in leading African consciousness, especially among young people, with his organization and the many people that are working within his organization. Clearly, Zimbabwe's future and Africa's future is within the right trajectory. To watch more and get more information, do follow us on our Facebook page, that is ZBC News Online, where you can get repeats of this episode, and you can also prompt what you want to know more within our African continent. My name is Jeffrey Murimbechi. You can catch us on the next episode.